Okay, so it's been a couple days. Hopefully you tried to work through some of them, so this looks at least familiar today. We are going to find the derivative. It's implicit differentiation, so we've got it in terms of x and y. So remember what you do not do. Okay, phones in the boxes, all of you, because I trust none of you. Put it in there. Where is your phone? Put it in the box. Thank you. Okay. All right, so what you do not do with implicit differentiation is we do not put dy dx equals. If we have x's and y's and we have not solved for y, we have to put it in there as we go. All right? So we are finding the derivative with respect to x. So what is the derivative of tangent? Secant squared. So this is secant squared x. I do not have to put dx dx because dx over dx is 1, right? Equals, so then I have two terms here. This 3x is just a term by itself. The derivative of 3x is 3. Okay. Plus, I have two things being multiplied here, so I have to use what rule? Product rule. So the derivative of the first, which is the derivative of x, is 1, times the second, which is the sine of y, plus the first, which is x, times the derivative of the second. What's the derivative of sine? Cosine. So this is cosine of y, and then dy dx. Okay. Everybody with me so far? So I want to isolate my dy dx term. I'm going to leave that on the right-hand side instead of moving it to the left. So this will give me secant squared x minus 3 minus sine y equals x times the cosine of y dy dx. Then what do? Divide. So this will give me secant squared x minus 3 minus sine y over x times cosine y equals dy dx. Okay. What questions do you have? Anything? Okay. Could you at least do the first 4 on the homework, hopefully? No. Nope. Okay. Well, maybe we should start there. Okay. Well, let's go ahead. Let's see. Do I even have that in front of me? I don't. Hang on just a second. All right, so we're going to do the same thing with b. All right, so I'm taking the derivative with respect to x. So what's the derivative of 1? 0. Okay, so I don't even have to put it. If you want to put it to keep it as a placeholder, that's fine. But then don't forget about this negative. So I have minus, and then I have the product rule here, right? The product rule gives me two terms. So especially since I have a negative out here, I'm going to open my parentheses. I'm going to take the derivative of the first, which is just 1, times y. So the derivative of the first times the second, plus the first times the derivative of the second. What's the derivative of y? Dy dx. Okay, everybody with me? So then that equals, what's the derivative of x? 1 minus, what's the derivative of y? Dy dx. Okay, everybody okay with where everything came from? At this point before I move on, we good? So I'm going to distribute my negative. So this gives me negative y minus x dy dx equals 1 minus dy dx. Okay, so I've got to get all my dy dx terms together. You want to move them to the left or to the right? To the right, okay. So that means that I'm going to move the 1 to the left. So if I'm going to move this to the right, I'm going to move this to the left. Okay, so this is going to give me negative y minus 1 equals negative dy dx plus x dy dx. Everybody with me? We could have moved it to the left or the right. You're going to get this Well, you might get a different looking answer, but it's the same answer. All right, so on the right-hand side, what am I going to need to do? Factor. Okay, so I'm going to move over here. Negative y minus 1 equals, I'm going to factor out a dy dx. Now, don't make a rookie mistake here. How many terms do I have? Right here, I have 2. So I'm going to have 2 inside these parentheses. What's the first one going to be? Negative 1 plus x. There you go. And then divide. So I would get negative y minus 1 divided by negative 1 plus x equals dy dx. Now, if we had moved everything to the left, our answer would look different. And if it's a multiple choice question, maybe I need to match it up. If it's not, it doesn't matter either way how you do it. So we're going to put a big or here, or dy dx would equal what? What do I do with this to make it look like the other? Y plus 1. Y plus 1 over 1 minus x. You just change the sign on every term. Okay, both of those would be the same thing. And of course, this could be x minus 1. I know you know that much, but you know this looks very different than this. And if you get this, and it's not on your multiple choices, but this is, it could really make you think that you don't have a clue what you're doing. Okay, how are we doing? We good? Any questions? Okay. Let's do this next one, and then we'll talk about the assignment. All right, so the first thing I'd like to do here, I think, is rewrite what I have. Yes, make this x to the 1/2 plus y to the 1/2. 1/2. I don't know what is wrong with my board. Equals 9. My 2's look nothing like 2's, but it won't let me write correctly. Okay, so it says find dy dx at the given point. If it says that, we don't necessarily have to solve for dy dx at the beginning. We want to try and make things a little bit easier on ourselves. So we're going to find the derivative. 1/2 times x to the negative 1/2 power. And then that would be dx dx, but we don't need it because that's 1. Plus 1/2 y to the negative 1/2 power. What does this need on it? dy dx. And remember to count your terms. So I have one y term, which means I need to have one term that has the dy dx on it. Equals, what's the derivative of 9? 0. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and fix this because of the negative exponents. So I got a negative exponent. I'm going to make a little fraction. In the numerator, I'll have 1. In the denominator, I have 2 times the square root of x. Plus, here, numerator is 1. The denominator goes 2, square root of y times dy dx. And that equals 0. So I have two options. I could solve for dy dx. Even though it doesn't ask me what dy dx is, it asks me what is dy dx at the given point. So I can choose to, at this point in my work, to go ahead and substitute that in. So that would give me 1 over 2 times the square root of 16 plus 1 over 2 times the square root of 25 times dy dx equals 0. Okay, I would suggest you just substitute it in so you don't do anything weird here. So the square root of 16 is 4, so this would give me 1 over 8 plus square root of 25 is 5, so that would be 1 over 10 times dy dx equals 0. Then what are we solving for? Dy dx. So I'm going to subtract 1/8, so I get 1/10 times dy dx equals negative 1/8. Multiply by 10. So when I multiply both sides by 10, dy dx is going to equal negative 10 over 8. So that means that dy dx evaluated at 1625 equals negative 5/4. So anytime you know you're going to evaluate it and it didn't just straight up ask you for dy dx, it's a little bit more efficient to just take the derivative, clean it up a little bit, but don't worry about solving, substitute it in, and then go forth and solve. Okay? What questions you got? All right. So then grab your assignment. Tell me where everything went downhill from the beginning. Is number 1 a problem? Is all of them are a problem? Okay, that's a great idea. So y'all do number 1. See if you get that answer, and then let me know. And then I'll work through it if I need to. Okay, ready? So follow along. The first thing you need to think is, this is a product. I need to use the product rule. So I take the derivative of the first. That's 3x squared. It's technically 3x squared dx dx, but you don't write that because it's 1. So I took the derivative of the first times the second, plus the first, which is x cubed, times the derivative of the second. Anytime you take the derivative of something with a y, you have to put the dy dx on it. So this is going to be multiplied by 4y cubed, because that's the derivative of y to the 4th, and then I have to put dy dx on it. Minus the derivative of 5y is 5, but I have to put a dy dx on it because I was taking the derivative of a y term. Equals the derivative of 2x is 2 dx dx. Before you move any farther, you go back and count. I had 2 terms that have y on it. I should have 2 dy dx terms, and I do. Those were missing from a lot of what y'all had. Okay, so then I look at this, and these 2 terms have dy dx on them. They're going to stay put, and I'm going to move this over to the other side. So that means that I'm going to have, I can make this into 4x cubed, y cubed, dy dx, minus 5 dy dx. I cannot combine the 5 and the 2 because one of them has a dy dx and one of them doesn't. Equals 2, and then I subtract this over, minus 3x squared y to the 4th. Then over here, because I have these 2 terms, I have to factor out the dy dx. That leaves me with 4x cubed, y cubed, minus 5 equals 2 minus 3x squared, y to the 4th. Then since this is being multiplied, I can divide, and dy dx is equal to 2 minus 3x squared, y to the 4th, over 4x cubed, y cubed, minus 5. That's your answer. Okay? What questions you got? Count your terms. Don't forget the dy dx. Got to know how to do, you got to recognize chain rule and make sure you actually do it. Okay? We all good on that? Yes. Exactly. Because I didn't take the derivative of it. It's just a y term. It's because we took the derivative and we're saying we took the derivative of y with respect to x. Okay? Mm-hmm. Yes. If you're asking on the product rule type question, yes. Right. Yes. Yes. Anything else? Okay. So look at that assignment.